Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Everyone is touched by psychiatric conditions, either themselves or a loved one. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Today on Healthy Minds.
You know, there used to be the old myth that if you talk about suicide, people will, may get more suicidal.
Right, talking about it, it was believed incorrectly, increases the risk, but actually talking about it, asking somebody directly about it, saves lives.
Yes. And so if you just think about it, if you're in a classroom and one day one of the topics that you discuss is suicide. You know, it's interesting because teachers see things, and if you talk with teachers, what they will often say to you is, I know, but what do I do? How do I get help? And sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's not so easy.
That's today on Healthy Minds. This program is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the John and Polly Sparks Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. What can we do to improve the mental well-being of our youth? Today I speak with Dr. Ann Sullivan, Commissioner of the New York State Office of Mental Health, who shares important initiatives and information that will be useful to parents, teachers, and young people. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
I want you to talk about some of the initiatives that you've been involved with in terms of educating young people about mental wellness, mental health.
I'd like to talk about a bill that was passed in the New York State Legislature last year called the Mental Health Education Act. And it's the first act in the country that actually mandates mental health education in schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. So it's very exciting.
So in addition to what we've done traditionally about health education, sex education, now they mandate a focus on mental wellness and mental health.
Yes, and what's great is that the Board of Education decided not just to have a curriculum in schools where they would add a few days of talking about mental health. They have a whole approach to doing emotional wellness throughout the school year. And they're basically working with teachers, parents, a resource center, which is run by the New York State Mental Health Association, to kind of get information out there, but also to build a culture in the schools of mental health and mental wellness. And that's really very exciting.
Often it's the teacher that may see there's a potential problem in a child, even before the parents may notice it. And educating teachers about what to look for and what to do is very important.
Oh, it's very important. And teachers in the past had one option, really. They would kind of call usually for help to maybe, especially if a child was having a serious issue in the school, they might bring a child to the emergency room. They might call for an ambulance to come because the child was really having difficulty. This gives them a chance to know the warning signs, to work with youth earlier, and to do things within the school setting so that youth don't have to go to an emergency room if they're having a really rough day, if they're very upset, if they are, more agitated than usual, or if they can't calm down in school. It gives teachers an outlet to understand what to do and how to work with youth, and then also how to work with their families, because obviously school is just a part of the day, and the rest of the day the youth goes home. So it's important for the communication between the families and the teachers to also be good. So I think that's another piece of what this is all about. So it's very exciting because it offers tools to the teachers as well. We've also been successful. We now have across the state 800 school-based clinics, mental health clinics actually in schools. And those clinics don't just provide services for the youth, they do a kind of consultation on an ongoing basis with the teachers, giving the teachers advice about how to work with youth that might be having problems and how to work with their families, as well as working with the youth.
So instead of the child and parent having to go out to some clinic or some other place for an appointment, it's right there in the school where it's comfortable for them to get the care that they need.
Yeah, and also the child really doesn't lose much time in school, so they can still have all the learning going on. And it becomes a way, I also think all of the work in schools decreases stigma. It normalizes mental health issues. You go to the school nurse if you have a cold, if you have a stomachache, and nobody feels bad about that. You go to the school nurse, you don't feel so good. And the parents don't feel bad if they get a call that says, oh, your son or daughter has a stomachache, maybe they should come home, that kind of thing. But people were very reluctant in the past to kind of go because there was an emotional upset or because a youth was having trouble. And now, with a combination of the mental health curriculum and a combination of having school-based clinics, there's much more of an awareness and a an improvement in going to ask for help. And I think that's great. That's
similar
great.
to how when we went to school, they would do an eye exam. And if you needed glasses, no big deal, you need glasses. We want that to be the case if there's anxiety or depression or some other mental health issue. Not a big deal. Get the help that you need.
Exactly. Many of the schools have put a kind of mindfulness curriculum in where there's time for you to just sit and kind of get in touch with yourself and how you're feeling and what you're thinking. I mean, these are great things to begin to do in schools very early on. So I think it's changing the way people think about stress, people think about problems that they might be encountering at home or in school, to really kind of get help early and say, well, maybe I could work on this. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a diagnosed mental illness. It can be a lot of preventive work before that happens, of helping individuals come and say what their issues are and get the help they need.
Makes it more comfortable for a child to say, I'm feeling anxious or worried or whatever else is on their mind, instead of just holding it in and letting it build up.
Absolutely. There's this great initiative working with parents very early on, and it's called Parent Corps. And it's in about 24 schools in New York City now. And Parent Corps is a kind of way where you teach parents, but you in the environment of the school, how to deal with behaviors that their children have that might be troublesome. It's for all parents, though. It's not just for kids who are having trouble. So basically, any child in that pre-K, their family can be a part of Parent Corps. And when they've done this training with parents, it's remarkable. They followed these youth for until age 8 or 9, and they had less problems in school, they were doing better academically, and they had fewer health problems as well. So it was fascinating that helping parents kind of know how to maybe be a little more able to deal with their children when they have a problem. We teach people everything. We have courses in everything. But what's fascinating is we don't help parents learn how to be parents. Somehow we all should magically know what it's like to be a parent. We teach them
how to change the diaper and make the formula,
right.
Maybe baby food, but not this even more important kind of stuff.
Yeah, and this gives a real in vivo kind of experience for parents to know how to work with their children.
What are some of the warning signs that are being taught to teachers, to parents, that they should be looking for to be of concern?
I think anything that seems, one of the things, anything that seems particularly different with a child. Kids, often you can read in the way they act, in the way they talk, that there's something going on. So something different. They get sometimes more withdrawn, sometimes more active, sometimes more irritating. Children who, something changes in the way they've been approaching. We often hear, well, somehow the grades start to slip, or somehow their attention isn't there. So things that change, teachers are always aware because they're in the classroom. So now they look at it with a different eye, and they say, well, is there something going on maybe in that child's life or internal to the child or in the child's family that maybe needs assistance, and they will kind of reach out to see what could be done. It's very important that the families also know that the schools have these services, and also that they learn also to look for those signs if the child is having some difficulty. So usually there's a change in behavior, and basically it's something, not just a day, but something that lasts for several days or a week, and you see a youth having some difficulties that they really didn't have before. Actually, in Connecticut, there is a wonderful program. It's the only one I've heard of, where they say handle with care. And if the police, this is in a small community, but if the night before someone knows, like the police or some other agency knows that something has happened in a family, they notify the school, and they just say handle with care when the child comes. They don't give them the specifics. They don't divulge anything for privacy purposes, but they alert the school in a way that says, this child might be coming in. They may be not up to
There was some
working.
stressful event, and be aware of it, to be sensitive, and I love the phrase handled with care.
And it's just so lovely. So I think there's this new beginning to think the role that schools can play in helping youth and families, and also that families can help schools to work with their child when they're going to school.
One of the challenges that children often face is bullying. And often that can happen in school, in the schoolyard. It could happen online with the internet. Tell me a little bit about that issue as well.
That's a very, very serious issue. Bullying, I'm pretty sure that the numbers show that up to 20% of youth in high schools have had an experience of being bullied. That's enormous. That means it's a very big problem. And that of that 20%, about half of those have some depressive symptoms as a result of the bullying. And we all know some of the tragic incidents that hit the media of individuals who either become active and aggressive following bullying or sometimes become withdrawn and depressed. So bullying is a very, very serious issue. And a big part of what we talk about social emotional wellness in schools is tackling this issue of bullying from an institutional point of view, helping youth see that this is just not something that you should be doing under any circumstances. And schools putting in curriculums to say it's not good, but it's not in the curriculum, it's in the spirit of the school, so that if someone is noticed being bullied, that the school takes some action. It's not just, oh, that happens with kids.
Kids will be kids.
The way
That's
it used
not
to
the
be
right
thought
approach.
of. It's not appropriate. And so I think schools are beginning to take that on. It's a very, very serious issue. And often youth are very reluctant to talk about it, so they don't go home and tell mom and dad. So it really has to be the school that begins to see this early on and takes some action. And there's a lot of work with teachers and schools about how to take on those issues when they begin to occur. But it's also putting a culture into the school that this is just not something you do, that you care about people, that you don't hurt people, and that you don't do things like this that can be harmful to people. And that starts in the culture of the school from early on. And I think the other thing which can be extremely helpful are peer groups. There are beginning to be peer groups, especially in the high schools, of high school students who work with other students. So when peers say, hey, don't do this, or peers say bullying is bad, or peers do suicide prevention, or peers work on emotional wellness, that's got a power that's beyond even what teachers or parents do, because it's their peers, it's their other students saying this is the way you need to behave. So bullying is a very, very serious issue and has to be taken increasingly seriously, and I think that the schools are beginning to do that.
One of the tragedies that occurs is suicide and risk of suicide in young people, and the numbers have been tragic, have been awful. Tell me a little bit about how this will impact suicide risk.
Now again, the suicide risk is, you're absolutely right that it's growing, while New York State has kind of stayed the same in terms of the number of suicides, the areas where they're growing are in youth. And the numbers are very, very disturbing, so that 30% of New York State high school students have thought about suicide. That's a huge number. 17% have actually attempted in some way, and 4 to 5% of that number have actually had to go to an emergency room.
Which are extraordinary statistics.
Extraordinary, and it's something that continues to grow. If you look at this, it's come up like 6-7% since 2011, at least in terms of the surveys that have been done. So we know it's a huge problem. And the youth are feeling hopeless. The youth can feel hopeless and depressed, and we need to be able to work with them. Now, how you do that, I think, again, it's the culture of the school and a kind of mindfulness. Again, it's noticing if individual youth seem more withdrawn, although with youth sometimes depression can be shown by, acting up to, not just getting more withdrawn.
They can be more irritable or withdrawn.
Withdrawn, you can go either way. But noticing it and talking about it and opening it up to be discussed in schools, I think, is really critical. So that's where the mental health education comes in. If you can have times where you talk about it, you say, depression is real. People can get depressed, and this is what you do. This is what it sounds like. This is what it is. And if you are depressed, this is how you can get help. And you just start talking about it like you would with any other issue, I think makes a huge difference. And that's why, personally, I think the whole mental health education and curriculum can have such a tremendous impact, because it'll be talked about. There used to be the old myth that if you talk about suicide, people will, may get more suicidal.
Right, talking about it it was believed incorrectly
Incorrectly.
increases the risk, but actually talking about it, asking somebody directly about it saves lives.
Yes. And so if just think about it, if you're in a classroom and one day one of the topics that you discuss is suicide, you know, sometimes people feel like they just want to, so hopeless that they feel there's no other way out. Sometimes people are so angry that they feel that this is the way out. How do you deal with that? What do you do about it? How do you handle it? I mean, just if you can begin having youth talk about that, then theoretically, when they graduate, when they become adults, I think they're also going to feel more open and free, even if they don't have those feelings as a youth when they're an adult. And that can have a huge impact, I think, on the stigma of mental health issues. You're now normalizing it. You're saying these are things that happen. This is the way people can feel. The issue isn't that you're feeling this way. The issue is what do you do with it?
What do you do about it? And it's natural to at times feel like this.
Yeah. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity here with the schools, and I think the schools are taking this on and taking it very, very seriously.
I want to talk a little bit about the important issue of chemical dependency and substance misuse in youth. Tell me a little bit about how this will impact those issues.
Well, that's a very, very serious issue. And I think, whenever they look at substance use, especially the use of marijuana, smoking, et cetera, that these things tend to be growing among our youth. There's also some use of opioids, some use of other stimulants. Alcohol, a big problem. So all of that intertwines, and we know that sometimes depression can lead to substance use. Substance use can lead to depression. These things are not separate from each other in any way. And I think, again, the schools have a big role, and so do parents, in really kind of not closing your eyes, knowing that these things can be going on, and talking about them openly, and helping youth realize the dangers, and also if you do see something, getting help for it early on, not just assuming it's just kids experimenting with stuff, that you really work with youth to understand the dangers of all these substances. And particularly marijuana, while in many ways there's some controversy about marijuana, we do know that for youth, marijuana can be very problematic in terms of lowering the age of onset of psychosis and sometimes precipitating psychosis. So it's very important that if there is legalization of marijuana, and New York State recognizes this, that it not be allowable under the age of 21.
It shouldn't be allowed at a young age, and also that young people realize their brains are still developing even through their mid-20s, and the effect of
Absolutely.
marijuana or other substances on them is greater than it would be on
Absolutely.
a fully developed brain, and there are risks associated.
And all the education, I've been talking primarily about mental health education, but there's a lot of education in schools that also works on substance use and the dangers and the helping youth understand what it could be. And that also has to be extended to parents, and I think a lot of schools kind of do work on that too, so the parents understand the risks and dangers of substance use. And certainly in some communities where it's so prevalent, it's very important to kind of get the word out and to work as hard as you can outside the schools too, in the community, to try to see if the use of substances by youth can be decreased, because it's very, very dangerous.
Another important issue relates to technology and social media, online gaming. Talk a little bit about the impact of that on our youth.
Well, it's a technological world. I know with my grandkids, the iPads are the big thing. And certainly the social media is a tremendous way it's got tremendous pluses in terms of individuals being able to kind of talk to each other, to express themselves. So I'm not someone who says, just stay away from the media. There's a potential for it to be misused. And I think that it's important when we teach about it, to teach about the responsibility of social media. If you're writing about a friend or if you're saying something, but be very careful, you have to think about how that's going to impact your friend, how it's going to impact other people who see what you're writing about. You have to think about what it's like to be putting certain things out there for anybody to see versus things that you think might be private. You really have to educate youth about it. It's so, I'm going to say, so easy for them to use it, and so attractive, that I think it's just one of those things where there has to be a lot of education for youth and for parents. There's a lot of literature about controlling the time and the access, and I think that can be important for parents, and they should think about that in terms of time and access to these technological advances. But on the other hand, I think in the schools, when we get back to kind of schools, curriculum, parents, It's a sense of responsibility, just like you have a responsibility when you're talking to someone or you're mailing them a letter or you're doing something in school. You have a responsibility on social media, and you have to think about what that is, and I think we have to help youth understand that that's a part of the future. And it's great, but they have to think they have some responsibility for anything that they put on that social media.
Right, and how they can make use of it in the positive ways, whether it be connecting with friends, staying in touch with people that they might have met in person, but they live in a distant community. So there's pluses to that, making use of those positive aspects.
And we actually have a crisis text line in New York State, and that's been used. It's getting used more and more by youth because that's an easy text that you can just contact, and basically the text enables people to not necessarily have to call. We have a lot of crisis call lines, but youth like texts.
Right, they don't use the phone.
They don't use the phone as much anymore. So now we have crisis text lines and text lines for individuals who might be experiencing suicidal ideation too, text lines. So those kinds of things are growing, and I think very useful for youth, and I think that they like that. And I think it's also a very good media use of texting and et cetera. So I think we need to grow those things as a positive way to use it. But I also agree with what you're saying. Youth need to see the positive sides, and parents the positive sides too. You can't always just say you can't do this kind of thing. You have to see what's positive and how to use it well.
I think the idea of texting, if somebody is thinking about suicide, it just says, however you reach out, reach out.
Exactly.
You're not alone.
Exactly. And I think for some people that feels easier than making a telephone call where you have to say something. You can get a response, immediately. Someone will text back. It feels anonymous, and yet you can get the help you may need. And often, sometimes when the texter back offers help, people accept it after you've had a kind of a conversation, really, through texting. So I think that it's a very useful thing for individuals, and the text line is getting used a lot.
I think often people are suffering in silence, and when they do reach out, even with a text, and get a response that shows help is available, they're likely to make use of that help.
Yeah, and I think that the response being empathic, being interested, saying I'm here to help, I think everyone kind of wants to hear that. So when you make that first step, being able to get a quick response is very important, and that's why text lines and crisis lines have been so successful over the years, because you finally feel like you can make that step. You need to get the response quickly. You can't say, I'll talk to you in an hour. It has to be right there, and I think text lines, crisis lines offer that, and they've been very helpful.
What do you see down the road? What are the next steps as you move forward with these initiatives?
I think the next steps is to increasingly connect the schools with the communities. It's interesting because teachers see things, and if you talk with teachers, what they will often say to you is, I know, but what do I do? How do I get help? And sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's not so easy, depending upon whether services are available, et cetera. So what's happening across the system, not just in New York, but in other states, is bringing schools and communities together so that schools know what's available. There's one program we have well developed in Syracuse, where every school is part of what they call a promise zone, and every school has a community-based agency, a mental health agency, and the community-based agencies tend to be social service agencies, community-based mental health agency, and a school, and they partner, and they meet like monthly to say, what are the issues? How can we help? How can we help each other? So the teachers know what's available in the community. The community often then puts a clinic in the school or has a liaison to the school. And the community-based agencies are there to help families if they have some social service problems, or if they need help with rent, or if they need help with getting food, whatever. So the whole thing kind of comes together around the schools so that everybody knows how to help each other and how to help the families help them and how to help the youth get the services they need. And I think that's the future, that the communities kind of wrap themselves around mental health, mental wellness. And the schools can be a kind of a precipitant of that. They can be the enzyme that kind of gets it going, but then they need everything else to be working. And I think that's a big movement now, to kind of help the schools become parts, not isolated unto themselves, but increasingly parts of the community and using community resources.
Well, I think these initiatives are already having an impact and will have a tremendous impact moving forward. And I want to thank you for the work that you've done to make that happen. and certainly for coming here today to share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Young people need all the support they can receive from parents, teachers, other adults, and from each other. Today we heard about important initiatives in this area. Remember, with help, there is hope. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. This program is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the John and Polly Sparks Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Remember, with help, there is hope. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein.